that a lot of people have been waiting for, because a taser has become a very key focus in this case. We're going to be hearing not only how the taser was made, but also some of the things that go into actually using the taser. We may hear, you are going to hear more insight on the impacts of the taser, whether or not it is lethal or how much it can really hurt somebody. We're also going to hear about serious injuries, what areas that they advise people to not be hit with the taser. We're also going to be hearing about the actual length of which you're supposed to use a taser at, meaning should you be 12 feet away, should you be 2 feet away? He talks that in detail. And both the defense and prosecution also talk about this greatly. They're trying to get as much clarification as possible to understand how this taser should be used, what are the warnings of using this taser, and they also focus on how effective it can be from a trained person versus an untrained person. Now, there are obviously a lot of questions into what goes into using a taser, and he goes into detail about the training for it as well, how people within the company are trained to use a taser, but then also how people who don't work with the company, like your local police department, is using the taser as well and is trained properly. We also got to hear the first question from a juror. Now, we didn't physically hear that question because, of course, we have to keep their identity away from everyone, but we're able to hear a judge, the judge, ask if the jurors had any questions, and there was a question asked, and we were able to hear that question. So we'll be talking about that as soon as Riley and Kelly are able to talk to us. I'm getting word that Kelly Lichter, who's been in the courthouse all day long, she joins us now. Kelly, kind of break down, what did we just hear from Brian?
Yeah, Lauren, so this testimony, I think, is at the crux of this trial. We're talking about the taser that was involved in the situation. So we were hearing questions from both the prosecution and the defense around the use of the taser and what could have been the use of the taser had it, fallen into the hands of someone who is untrained. When the taser is in the hands of an officer like former Officer Schurr, he is a trained professional. They are trained at GRPD on how to use this taser, but the defense was trying to argue that if the taser were to get into the hands of Lyoya, he is an untrained person who does not have familiarity with the type of Axon taser, at least, that was used in this case. So it was really trying to prove, the difference between someone who was trained using this taser and someone who was untrained using this taser. And then the prosecution was also trying to question, if the untrained person gets the use of the taser, would they know how to use it improperly? So they were being questioned for 2 hours in there, which is the longest testimony that we've seen at this point in the trial, Lauren.
Ask about that questioning. We heard both the defense and prosecution asking what seemed like similar questions to this person, and we saw similar answers. Is there any way you can help us kind of understand what their question was for each separate case?
Yeah, so the prosecution was trying to gear their question towards, what we've been saying since the beginning of this trial. They want to try to prove that this was an intentional death and that, it was unjustified. So they were trying to prove that even if this taser, fell into the hands of Lyoya, that he could not cause great bodily harm or death with it. And that's the whole entire point. They were saying, even if the taser was fully deployed, could there be a chance of great bodily harm or death if the taser, before it's deployed, just in a regular scenario, if the taser was being used, could someone die from it? And then also in training manuals, in warnings, there is warnings that the taser could cause death. And Kent County Prosecutor Chris Becker was really narrowing in on that it's not necessarily that death can be caused from the taser directly. It's someone being tased, fallen, if, let's say, they're being tased and they're on top of a roof of a house, or even if they're just standing and they're tased and they fall in the cement. So it's trying to prove that the taser cannot cause great bodily harm, so it was not justification for the shooting that occurred. Now, on the flip side, on the defense, kind of like I was saying earlier, they're trying to prove that if this taser fell into the hands of an untrained person, such as Lyoya, that, it could have been caused improperly. There are warnings, in the Axon training services that if the taser is launched into parts like the eyes, the groin, the chest in some cases, that it could cause great bodily harm. I know that the expert Brian Childs also brought up blindness if it is launched to the eye. So they were trying to prove that in theory, if the taser fell into the wrong hands, that it could cause great bodily harm, and Schurr was fearing for his life, and that was justification for the shooting. And that's what we've been saying all along. I said this yesterday in the morning. I've been saying it all day. This is what they're trying to prove. It's around this taser. Did Schurr fear for his life, or was it unjustified for the shooting, Lauren?
I want to ask about the NMI. We kept hearing that over and over again, and it seemed like it revolved around those injuries or areas that could cause some injuries. Can you talk about what exactly that is?
Yeah, so NMI is neuromuscular incapacitation, and that is, when someone is tased, it affects their muscles. So when you're getting tased, it's not getting launched at your bones. If it hits a muscle, something meaty, then you are incapacitated for a certain number of seconds. I believe it was 5 seconds. I don't know off the top of my head without my notes. But it's just, for a few short seconds, you're incapacitated. Then when, the taser is released, then it goes back to normal. There are no long-term effects of this taser, which is something that Becker was questioning about. If someone was tased, like in this situation, I think he was, getting at if Schurr was tased, would he have, just gone back to normal? But on the flip side, on the defensive side, they were arguing that if Schurr was tased under NMI, someone could have reached for his weapon, such as his gun or other things that he had on his person. He would have been incapacitated for those few seconds. So it really revolved around how much could an individual do, if they were under this NMI. And there was also questioning around, was the taser deployed twice, which the taser was deployed twice, then what, are the ramifications, and what could you do with a taser if it's already been deployed twice? And so again, it just really revolved around if someone's incapacitated, what could happen during that time.
And we also got clarification that no one was hit by the taser in this situation. Is that right, Callie?
That is correct. No one was directly hit by the taser. It did not latch onto any skin parts. However, it was launched into the ground. And there was also questioning around, if a taser is deployed, what can happen? Can someone still get, shocked? I'm going to use that word, shocked by the taser, get tased. If it's deployed by the strings, by the little, I believe they're capsules at the end, of the taser. What can happen after it's already deployed? Can it still be used? Are there still harmful effects? I believe I'm getting word that they are probes. They're called probes. And so that's what really was the question about. No one was directly hit, but the question then becomes, what could happen after it's already been deployed? Can someone still get tased?
Sounds like we got our first question from the jury. One of the jurors asked a question. Can you talk about what question they asked and what the response was?
Yes, so the juror asked about what we saw earlier when there was the close-up of the taser that was used. In this incident, there was some mud and dirt on the end, and they were asking, does that impact the tasing at all, the tasing ability? And I believe that Childs did say that it could impact the tasing ability, because it is a piece of matter that can obstruct where the shock comes out. And that was due to the taser being shoved into the ground, essentially, and during I believe the second deployment of the taser, Lauren.
Is there anything else that was a big takeaway for you in this testimony? We heard a lot from this expert. Is there anything that really stands out?
Just going back to, what is the capability of this taser if it's already deployed? We talked about the drive stun, which is when even if the taser is deployed, like what we think about when the things shoot out of the taser, can it still tase? And it still can. There are 4 prongs on each corner of the taser. It kind of is like a rectangle there on all 4 corners. And if you drive that directly into the skin, it could still tase, or it could still harm someone, not necessarily tase, sorry. It could cause, you know, a lot of pain, not necessarily great bodily harm, you know, if it's just latched into like a meaty part of the body, but it can cause pain. It also talked about, you know, a closed circuit, because you can also, you know, drive stun someone while they're also being tased with the actual shooting parts of the taser. And again, the defense really latched onto if someone's drive stunned in an area that they're told not to aim for, such as the eyes, the chest, or, you know, the sensitive areas of the body. Will it still hurt or cause great bodily harm? And I think the conclusion that was come up with is yes. If someone is drive stunned, if you know, those four corners, those four prongs, you know, hit the eyes, it could cause great bodily harm, Lauren.
Callie, we appreciate all of your reporting. We're going to let you get back into proceedings because we've heard that they've started again. So again, thank you for all of your knowledge on this.